Hello, I'm Brian Fox. Welcome to I Hate Rock Music. Thought I'd do something a little different today because I was listening to a bunch of Groundhogs bootlegs I have, and I just started thinking something that's probably obvious to a lot of diehard T.S. McPhee and Groundhogs fans, and that's the idea that T.S. McPhee could very well be the white British Jimi Hendrix. And so I started going and looking through all the parallels, and it seems to be a case that could be made. And so I'll start right off with the fact that one of the main reasons why I decided to make this comparison is because listening to particularly Groundhogs Live, it seems like Tony McPhee was always looking for new sounds that could be made on guitar and just totally reveled in all the possibilities of what an electric guitar could do, and that certainly is true of Jimi Hendrix. But let's start from the beginning. Of course, Jimi Hendrix cut his teeth on blues and R&B and could play blues and R&B with his eyes closed, completely steeped in all the techniques of all the great R&B and blues players. And the same is true of T.S. McPhee. Of course, his career started a lot earlier in the early '60s. And he was already a known quantity in the UK, but he cut his teeth with the Groundhogs backing up a lot of American blues artists that toured the UK, including a notable recorded session with John Lee Hooker that's available on a semi-legit album. And so both guitars are really steeped in traditions and rose from there. And then we also have the fact that the Groundhogs, by the time of their second official album, Blues Obituary, became a power trio, and T.S. McPhee was known for having a power trio from about 1968 to 1974. And of course, Jimi Hendrix played in a power trio. And I'll also mention the fact that both bands had drummers that were really telepathic with their guitar players. In the case of the Groundhogs and T.S. McPhee, it was Ken Pastelnick. And with Jimi Hendrix, of course, it was Mitch Mitchell. And when you listen to live records by both bands, you see that both drummers, although of course Mitch Mitchell was much more versatile and based in jazz, both drummers could follow the whims of their respective guitar players, no matter what kind of extrapolations they took them through. That brings up another point, of course, is when you get to the live records, especially, Jimi Hendrix would take a lot of his older songs and keep reinventing them through his career. T.S. McPhee also did the same thing, playing old Groundhogs songs through his whole career and reinventing a lot of them. A lot of times ended up playing them a lot faster. And then the fact that both guitars would take some songs, in the case of Jimi Hendrix, something like Room Full of Mirrors, and he would stretch it out over 20 minutes. And Groundhogs did the same thing with some of their songs like Mistreated, where some of the live treatments were 20 minutes long. The other thing that's interesting, of course, is that with both T.S. McPhee and Jimi Hendrix, within, say, a 20-minute jam, they would go through all kinds of variations, and there'd be points where the band would drop out, and both Jimi Hendrix and T.S. McPhee would just go off on solo guitar excursions in the middle of these magnum opuses and explore all kinds of different variations and improvisations. And so that's very striking. I also think another similarity is both T.S. McPhee and Jimi Hendrix were relatively restrained in the studio setting, and the Groundhogs studio records are very meticulous, and T.S. McPhee's guitar work is very purposeful, and you find the same with Jimi Hendrix. And both guitarists, once they got on a live stage, all bets were off, and they would explode with sound and variations and improv. And so uh, another thing is the effects. T.S. McPhee makes no secret of the fact that he really admired all the sounds and effects that Jimi Hendrix used. And when you look at a combination of their rigs, of course, T.S. McPhee generally used an SG, but he used a Stratocaster on the album Split. And Hendrix, of course, favored the Stratocaster. And then T.S. McPhee used a synth pedal, which of course wasn't available when Jimi Hendrix was playing, but he probably would have adapted that. And both used Jimi Hendrix used an Octavia, and T.S. McPhee used an octave splitter. Um, Jimi Hendrix used an Arbiter fuzz face, and T.S. McPhee used a Shii super fuzz, and a Shinai, I should say. And then Jimi Hendrix used a Shinai pedal too, the Univibe. And so both of them kind of used similar rigs. But it's interesting to think about the fact that Jimi Hendrix, of course, died in 1970, and a lot of the more interesting pedals started showing up in the early 70s when Jimi Hendrix was already gone. T.S. McPhee had the luxury of exploring all kinds of different new pedals like ring modulators and the synth pedal and that. And I'm very confident that Jimi Hendrix, in his search for new sounds, would have embraced a whole bunch of new pedals going into the early 70s. And that's the other thing, that the fact that both Jimi Hendrix and T.S. McPhee were constantly searching for new sounds and new ways to express guitarisms, although it's amazing, as T.S. McPhee himself said, that all the things that Jimi Hendrix was capable of and the sounds he could get with the limited amount of pedals that were available at the time. Of course, both of them used wah pedals. Jimi Hendrix used the Quiet Crybaby, and I'm not sure what wah that Tony McPhee used, but both of them are really heavy on the wah pedal and how expressive it is. And of course, both of them played super loud. And so when I listened to Groundhog's bootlegs and Jimi Hendrix back to back, the guitar mayhem that's unleashed is pretty comparable. And then the fact that both of them really had a lot of technique. One could argue that Hendrix had a little bit more in some sense, but he played with a pick, whereas T.S. McPhee used his thumb a lot, and sometimes T.S. McPhee's articulation is somewhat on the sloppy side, for lack of a better way to explain it. Although I just listened to a show by the Groundhogs in '76, and Tony McPhee is obviously using a pick. His articulation is a lot more precise, and so that comparison can still be made. It was really interesting to hear that period where T.S. McPhee was using a pick. So, and then of course the fact that both of them used really high volume, both of them used a lot of distortion, and both of them were masters of feedback. And it goes back to the idea I bring up, that both of them were really completely enveloped with all the possibilities of what an electric guitar could do, and reveled in all the different sounds and noises that a guitar could make. And both T.S. McPhee and Jimi Hendrix obviously used a lot of noise elements that ended up coming out with the use of those pedals and the high volume. And so that's another comparison. And then interestingly enough, too, their voices. T.S. McPhee is not what you'd call a classic frontman lead singer type, and Jimi Hendrix wasn't either, and felt very self-conscious about his voice. And so both of them had pretty untrained voices per se, but both of them were able to use their vocal limitations and come up with very effective and emotive ways of singing. And then both of them also were very interested in what the music and guitar sounds could be done in the studio, using the studio as another instrument. And Jimi Hendrix was the master of that, listening to Electric Ladyland and all the effects and different uses of what a studio could do. And certainly T.S. McPhee and the Groundhogs was the same. Was very interested in what the interaction between the band and a studio and what could be done. And then one other interesting parallel to me, in a way, it's just kind of interesting, is that, of course, Hendrix did the version of Star Spangled Banner, all interpreted with guitars, and there's a great studio version where he layers a whole bunch of guitars for a stunning studio version of Star Spangled Banner. And T.S. McPhee kind of did the same thing with on the Who Will Save the World album, where he does a stunning guitar interpretation of Amazing Grace. And so he may or may not have kind of gotten that idea from from his hero Jimi Hendrix. So of course T.S. McPhee didn't use a lot of stage antics where Hendrix certainly in the early part of his career did. So that's a difference. And of course the trajectory of their career is a lot different. Jimi Hendrix turned the whole world on its head, and T.S. McPhee and the Groundhogs had a fervent following in the UK, but certainly didn't shake the world. They should have. They were just a little too underground, not quite as sensational, and didn't really have hit songs. You know, Jimi Hendrix managed to have hit songs in the midst of everything else he was doing. So there's definitely some marked differences, but I'm struck by the fact that there's a lot of similarities, and just the joy of everything an electric guitar can do in using distortion and feedback and volume. The guitar players are definitely very comparable. So be interested to hear what anybody else out there says. I'm sure most diehard T.S. McPhee Groundhogs fans have already come to this conclusion, but I'm going to come right out and say it. Is Tony McPhee the white British Jimi Hendrix? I'm Brian Fox. Thank you for watching I Hate Rock Music.